She slapped him, not hard, but loud enough to make the entire first-class cabin fall silent. A 13-year-old black boy stood there, boarding pass still in his hand. Gray hoodie. No adult beside him. Just the quiet, stunned look of a kid who hadn't even said a word yet. "You're not supposed to be here," the flight attendant snapped. She had no idea who he was, or what would happen exactly 3 minutes later. "Tell us where you're watching from, because what you're about to see shook the entire airline industry." Earlier that morning, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Kairo Washington didn't like flying first class. It wasn't the seats, or the food, or the lounge with people drinking espresso at 6 a.m. It was the stairs. That sharp, quiet suspicion that crept in when adults saw a black kid walk into a premium cabin. Alone, hoodie on, beat-up laptop bag over his shoulder. They didn't say it, but he could feel it. What is he doing here? Today was no different. He walked on to Flight 481, headed from Seattle to San Diego. Gate agent scanned his boarding pass, 2A, first class. He thanked her and stepped inside. Calm, soft-footed, carrying nothing but his satchel and a dog-eared engineering notebook. Kairo wasn't just traveling. He was on assignment. He'd been helping his father, Dr. Lionel Washington, run simulations for the latest update of Ethos AI, the ethics-driven aviation system used across 42 airports. This was supposed to be a test flight, anonymously observing how frontline airline crews treated non-standard passengers. Ethos AI called it Scenario 6B. Kairo called it real life, but even he didn't expect it to escalate so fast. He placed his bag in the overhead bin and pulled out his notebook. He'd barely settled in when he heard heels clicking. A blonde woman in a tight bun and pristine uniform stopped beside him. Her name tag read Shelby. "Excuse me," she said with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Kairo tilted his head slightly but complied. He pulled up his mobile wallet and showed it. She stared at the screen, then at him, then back at the screen. First class," she said, as if the words didn't belong with his face. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, polite, firm. Shelby didn't budge. "Are you sure this wasn't a mistake? Who booked this ticket?" "My father," he said, still calm. Her lips tightened. "And where is he?" "He's not flying today." That was enough. She spun around and walked off, heels echoing louder than before. 2 minutes later, she returned, this time with Chase, a tall male flight attendant with military posture and no smile. "Sir," Chase said, "we need to verify your seat assignment. Can you please step into the aisle?" Kairo looked down at his ticket, looked up, still no sign of a question. He stood. "I've already been scanned at the gate," he said softly. Shelby stepped in again. "Don't give us attitude. You're being uncooperative." Still no raised voice from Kairo, just quiet disappointment. It was that look, not angry, not afraid, just tired. That pushed her over the edge. The slap came fast. Her hand cracked across his cheek before anyone in the cabin could even react. A sharp gasp from a woman in 1D. A businessman lowered his paper. A couple in 3B went silent mid-conversation. And Kairo didn't move. He just stood there, one hand still holding his boarding pass, the other gripping the edge of his hoodie. Shelby's voice broke through the stunned silence. "You're being disruptive. You can either move to economy or get off this flight entirely." She pointed to the back of the plane. Kairo didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't even flinch. He walked. All the way to seat 23E, smack in the middle of the economy cabin, between a snoring man in cargo shorts and a woman juggling 2 crying toddlers. He sat down, fastened his seatbelt, pulled his hood slightly lower, and then he reached into his bag. Not for a phone, not for snacks, but for a small gray device no bigger than a pen cap, custom printed with a single glowing icon. More. It was one of the final prototypes he'd built with his dad. An ethics override interface, linked directly to Dignity Grid. a classified AI protocol capable of flagging live bias-based violations and triggering gridlock, a system-wide freeze across participating airlines. It wasn't built for revenge. It was built for truth. He touched the biometric sensor. A faint light blinked. The device scanned his iris through his contact lens, faster than a blink. Authorized. Level 0, user K. Washington. Dignity violation detected. Flight 481, Cabin 1. Agent Shelby. Engaging GridLock Protocol. And just like that, the sky began to lock down. 3 minutes later, halfway across the country at Ethos AI headquarters in San Jose, chaos erupted. Alarms went off. Screens lit up red. Data began pouring in. 142 flights flagged. 19 airports affected. Over 2.6 bot inactive ESG contracts automatically suspended. Lead engineer Jamie burst into Dr. Washington's office. "Sir, we have a gridlock trigger." Lionel looked up from his tablet. "Passenger class?" "Minor. Solo. Black male. Alleged physical assault by cabin crew. Video confirmation pending." "Name?" Jamie hesitated. "Kairo Washington." The room froze. Lionel didn't speak. He simply nodded and turned back to his screen. "Don't override," he said. "Let it run." Back on Flight 481, Shelby stood near the galley, sipping water with shaky hands. Chase glanced at her. "You think we're good?" She scoffed. He probably didn't even understand what happened. Just some kid with a free ticket. 2 rows behind them, Kairo looked out the window. The clouds rolled by like nothing had changed. But Kairo knew. Something had. When Flight 481 touched down in San Diego, no one clapped. No smiling flight attendants at the front. No cheerful, "Welcome to California." Only awkward silence and stiff goodbyes. Shelby didn't say a word as Kairo walked past her on his way out. She didn't look at him, didn't apologize, didn't even blink. She didn't know yet, but the system had already moved. Ethos AI headquarters, San Jose, California, 6:57 a.m. Inside the command room of one of the most advanced ethics systems in the world, red lights blinked in rhythmic pulses across a massive dashboard wall. An overhead screen listed 142 active flight codes in flashing orange. Each one marked Status, Ethics Flagged, Suspended. Below it, airports like JFK, LAX, O'Hare, Dallas-Fort Worth, and Denver were mapped out, connected to a real-time ethics tracking network, Dignity Grid. At the center of it all was Kairo's trigger, and everyone in the building knew it. Dr. Lionel Washington stood in silence as a team of engineers gathered around the gridlock interface. "Confirmed incident from Flight 481, Jamie, lead AI auditor, announced. "We've got full audio. The flight attendant struck a minor. Passenger's iris matched Kairo's biometric ID. System flagged it as a Class A dignity breach, bias-based aggression." Another engineer turned from her monitor. "Sir, 4 major airline alliances just called. Their flights are being held at multiple gates. They're demanding to know why." Lionel didn't respond at first. Instead, he walked over to the display screen, tapped once, and pulled up the internal footage from the plane. The cabin recording replayed the moment of contact. Shelby's hand, Kairo's face, the stunned silence. Everyone in the room went quiet again. Lionel inhaled, calm, grounded, like a man who had spent his whole life preparing for this exact moment. "Let them wait," he said. "Let the world see what justice looks like when it doesn't knock. It logs in." 7:18 a.m., FAA office, Washington, D.C. A red alert flashed on the main screen in the Ethics Compliance Division. The system auto-generated a summary. Gridlock triggered. Class A ethics violation, passenger. Minor, solo, black male violation. Physical assault by cabin crew system freeze initiated. 142 flight suspended. 19 airports flagged. 2.6B ESG investments temporarily locked, pending review. Within minutes, emails poured in. Airline CEOs, ESG fund managers, airport directors. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted control. But Ethos AI didn't need anyone's permission. The whole point of Dignity Grid was that once a dignity breach was verified, by biometric match, cabin scan, and AI voice analysis, the system had independent enforcement power. That was the deal. That was the protocol the airlines agreed to, until it bit back. Kairo stepped off the plane like nothing had happened. He didn't wait for a driver. He didn't speak to the flight staff. He didn't even check his phone. He walked straight to the back exit of Terminal 2, where a black electric sedan sat waiting. The window rolled down. Lionel was in the driver's seat. "You okay?" he asked. Kairo didn't answer right away. He slid into the back, took off his hoodie, and finally looked up. "I'm not hurt," Lionel nodded. "Good." They didn't speak for a full minute as the car glided through downtown traffic. Then Kairo finally said it. "I didn't do it because I'm your son." Lionel's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "I know. I did it because they think kids like me can't say anything, can't fight back." His voice cracked just once. Lionel didn't interrupt. "They didn't even ask if I was okay after she hit me," Kairo said. "They didn't care who I was, and it shouldn't matter who I was, that's the point." Lionel exhaled slowly. "You did exactly what the system was built for." 10:42 a.m. Emergency Ethics Session, FAA DC. 23 executives and federal officers crammed into a boardroom where the mood was somewhere between fury and panic. On screen was a live feed from Ethos AI, a digital map tracking every grounded flight. Red lines covered the skies. "Are you telling me," one executive barked, "that a kid froze $2.6 billion in flight operations?" "No," replied an Ethos AI representative via video. "The system did. The kid just happened to be the victim." Murmurs filled the room. "And who built this system?" The screen split, revealing a live stream of Dr. Lionel Washington, now seated behind a simple desk in San Jose. "I did," Lionel said calmly. "And what exactly do you want?" Lionel paused, then leaned forward. "We don't want anything. We need something. An industry that doesn't require someone to be rich, famous, or perfect-looking to be treated with basic human dignity." The room fell quiet. Another executive whispered, "What happens if we don't comply?" Lionel didn't flinch. "Then GridLock stays locked. Every hour you delay, your ESG scores drop. Your flights remain grounded. Your investors get nervous. And your passengers, they go elsewhere." He tapped a file on the desk. Passenger Integrity Accord. A 32-page framework outlining mandatory ethics training, bias audits, and anonymous reporting standards, all tied directly to access to Ethos AI's real-time routing and optimization tools. "Sign it," Lionel said, "or stay grounded." Back in San Diego, Kairo sat alone in his hotel room. He stared at the ceiling. He wasn't proud. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even relieved. He was tired, not physically, emotionally. Tired of walking into rooms and being doubted. Tired of people assuming his place was somewhere in the back, near the bathroom, near the noise, near invisibility. His laptop buzzed. A news alert popped up. "Breaking, FAA, signs, Passenger Integrity Accord. First time in U.S. history a minor triggers systemic airline reform." Another alert. 2.6 B in ESG investments reinstated, contingent on compliance. Then a trending hashtag. Who? Was the passenger? Kairo stared at the screen. His name wasn't there. No one knew who he was. And for now, he liked it that way. Later that night, Lionel knocked on his door. "You hungry?" Kairo shook his head. "Not really." Lionel stepped in, sat at the edge of the bed. "You know, when we first tested Dignity Grid, we thought adults would be the ones triggering it." Kairo smirked. "Guess that didn't work out." "You know what that means, though." Kairo shrugged. "It means the future of fairness won't come from people like me," Lionel said. "It'll come from kids who've seen unfairness up close and still choose to build something better." Kairo didn't respond. but his shoulders dropped a little. His eyes softened. The next morning, as the sun rose over San Diego Bay, Kairo opened his laptop. He clicked on the GridLock system. All 142 flights were now marked released under watch. He hovered over one file, Flight 481, then clicked Tag Review. A pop-up appeared. Assign post-review notes. Kairo typed, "Passengers shouldn't need to prove they belong. Systems should prove their fare." He hit enter, and just like that, the skies began to open again. Not because the system forgave, but because someone dared to hold it accountable. The airlines called it a glitch. The media called it a rebellion. But behind closed doors, at every airport, airline, and aviation board meeting that week, one word kept surfacing again and again: gridlock. No one could override it. No one could predict it. And worst of all for the industry, no one could stop it from happening again. But that wasn't what Kairo cared about. Not really. He didn't trigger the system to prove a point. He triggered it because that was what it was meant to do. What no one saw coming, not even Kairo himself, was what the gridlock would expose. Monday, FAA Regional Ethics Briefing, virtual session. Over 200 people logged into a closed-door Zoom call labeled Emergency Review, Cabin Bias Violation, Minor Passenger Case 481. Some were nervous, some defensive, but one group? They looked confused. Shelby, Chase, and Operations Manager Lori Herron sat in muted frames, eyes darting as they waited to be called on. When the FA moderator finally unmuted them, Shelby leaned forward first. "I would like to clarify," she began, "that at no point did I intend to cause harm. I simply followed protocol. The passenger appeared lost, out of place." "You mean the black kid?" someone interrupted. Shelby froze. She stammered. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." A woman from the Department of Aviation Culture leaned into the mic. "Here's the problem, Ms. Shelby. You treated him like a threat, not a guest. You questioned his presence, not his boarding pass. That's not protocol, that's bias." The room fell silent. Then, the FAA pulled up a chart, compiled entirely by Ethos AI. It showed every recorded incident in the past 6 months involving first-class passengers being asked to reconfirm their seats. 82% of them, passengers of color. Meanwhile, in San Jose, Kairo sat on a folding chair in a side office at Ethos AI. He wasn't watching the hearings. He wasn't reading the headlines. He was reviewing something else entirely: voice patterns. His laptop played back audio from cabins across 5 recent flights flagged by Dignity Grid. One clip hit him hard. "Sir, you'll need to show your ID again." "But I already scanned it. It's for your safety and ours." Kairo recognized the tone instantly. That calm, sanitized suspicion. Too polite to call racist, too firm to ignore. He scribbled something into his notes. "Does safety always mean you don't look like you belong?" He paused, then underlined it. Twice. Back in DC, the conversation had shifted. An executive from Polaris Air, one of the grounded airline groups, leaned into the mic. "I think we've forgotten something here. This was just one flight, one kid. We can't let an entire industry be crippled by a single incident." But the FAA didn't flinch, because they had just received a second file. Kairo hadn't sent it. The system had. 27 similar incidents in the past 6 months, all involving passengers of color, cabin crew raising safety concerns. Upgraded passengers questioned despite confirmed tickets. One case involved a Latina nurse mistaken for a cleaning staff member. Another? A Sikh man in a turban nearly removed midair because a crew member felt uneasy. Ethos AI had quietly logged all of it, but no one paid attention until a 13-year-old pressed record later that afternoon. Private debriefing, Ethos AI. Kairo sat with Lionel and a senior analyst named Mira. "We didn't just freeze flights," she told them. "We froze the culture. That's what really scared them." Kairo looked up. "So now what?" Lionel leaned forward. "We give them a way out, but only if they walk through it honestly." Mira pulled up a draft on the screen. Passenger Integrity Accord, Article 3.2, Cabin Perspective Review. All first-class crew from flagged incidents must complete a dual-phase reallocation. Phase 1. Work alongside the customer experience team to read and respond to real passenger complaints. Phase 2. Serve in economy cabins for no less than 30 days to observe first-hand passenger diversity. Kairo blinked. "Wait, we're not firing them?" Lionel smiled, just a little. "You think humiliation is the best way to change a person's heart?" "No," Kairo muttered, thinking of Shelby. "But understanding might be." The very next day, Shelby and Chase arrived at an unfamiliar desk. No flight uniforms, no badges, just plain black polos and name tags labeled CX Support. They weren't giving drinks. They weren't closing overhead bins. They were answering emails from angry passengers. One message read, "I paid for first class, and your crew looked me up and down like I was a mistake." Another, "My mother is 72, wears traditional clothing, and was humiliated on her birthday flight. She hasn't flown since." Shelby sat back. No excuses, no protocols, no training checklist, just pain, real pain. For the first time, she wasn't managing the cabin. She was reading what it felt like to be on the other end of it, and it didn't feel good. 2 weeks later, Kairo flew again. Same hoodie, same laptop, same quiet confidence. As he stepped onto a new flight, Flight 223 from San Diego to Denver, a flight attendant greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard," she said. "Can I help you find your seat?" Kairo held up his boarding pass. 2A. "Of course," she gestured. "Right this way." No second glances, no extra scans. No one asked who booked his ticket. As he sat down, he noticed something strange. Across the aisle, an older man, white, maybe in his 60s, nodded at him. "Good to see you up here, son," he said kindly. Kairo blinked. "Thanks." The man leaned closer and added, "We've got work to do, don't we?" Kairo tilted his head. "You know?" The man smiled. "You're not as anonymous as you think." Then he winked. Back at Ethos AI, Jamie received a text. It was from a new hire at one of the airlines, a junior crew member. The message read, "I used to think ethics training was just corporate nonsense. But today, a kid in row 7 told me I was the first person who ever made her feel safe on a plane. Whoever designed Dignity Grid, tell them thank you." Jamie showed it to Lionel. Lionel smiled, but didn't forward it to Kairo because he already knew. Later that night in Kairo's bedroom, the boy sat at his desk. He wasn't coding, he wasn't watching TV, he was sketching. On his notebook, he had written a phrase across the top. "You shouldn't have to look important to be treated like a person." Below it, a rough interface diagram. New design ideas for GridLock 2.0. Simpler, faster, more intuitive. He paused, then added one more box. Anonymous passenger trigger. All ages, all classes. Because the next person to be slapped might not have a prototype, might not have a billionaire dad, might not even know they were allowed to say no, but the system would. 2 weeks later, Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. The flight attendant smiled politely as the gate announcement echoed overhead. "Now boarding. All passengers seated in first class, rows 1 through 3. Kairo stood up. Same gray hoodie, same black satchel, no entourage, no badge, no one walking beside him. Just a 13-year-old black kid with quiet eyes, and a seat in 2A. This time, no one stared. No one flinched. No one whispered. Even Shelby, who happened to be working the gate that morning, didn't recognize him, until she did. It was subtle. A blink too long, the color draining from her face. But Kairo didn't pause. He nodded, like any polite passenger would, then walked past her and onto the jet bridge. She didn't stop him, didn't check his ticket, didn't dare. He didn't smile either, not because he was cold, because this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Cabin 1 was half full when he entered. He placed his satchel gently in the overhead bin, sat down, pulled out a copy of Wired magazine, and opened to the page he'd already dog-eared. The article title, How a Silent Passenger Brought the Airline Industry to Its Knees and Reset the Bar for Dignity. No byline. Just an author listed as anonymous. Kairo smirked. He didn't write it. But the writer knew what they were talking about. Across the country, at Ethos AI HQ, the ripple effects were still spreading. Every airline that had signed the Passenger Integrity Accord had 30 days to complete 3 deliverables. Full staff retraining on unconscious bias. Anonymous customer complaint loop live on every in-flight screen. Inclusion of passenger dignity score in annual ethics review. Failure to comply. Immediate lockout from Ethos AI's flight optimization engine. The one thing keeping airlines profitable in a post-gridlock era. And just last week, 2 major carriers had already missed the deadline. Their consequences? 13 airports delisted their routes. 880 million in ESG-linked investment froze overnight. No press conferences, no boycotts, no drama. Just silence and locked gates. Meanwhile, Shelby sat alone in the back jump seat, flipping through her recertification packet. She hadn't flown in first class since that day. After the retraining program, she'd been moved to economy rotation, not as punishment, but as process. The new Ethos AI protocol required all flagged crew to experience 30 days of standard service conditions. It wasn't about breaking people down, it was about waking them up. Shelby didn't argue. She was tired of arguing, and part of her, a part she hadn't told anyone about, knew she needed it. Back on Flight 882, Kairo looked out the window as the plane began taxiing. The captain's voice crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Today's flight time is approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes to Denver. We thank you for choosing us, and we hope your experience reflects the standard of care and respect every passenger deserves. Kairo's eyes flicked up. That phrase, care and respect, hadn't been part of any captain's script 2 months ago, but it was now, because it had been added to the FAA's new Cabin Ethics Handbook. Section 1.1.3, Opening Language, Mandatory Respect Clause. He'd written it himself. 2 rows ahead, a mother was helping her young daughter with her seatbelt. The girl had deep brown skin and wide, curious eyes. She pointed at the sparkling orange juice in a glass and whispered something to her mom. Kairo smiled to himself, then reached into his bag, pulled out a wrapped chocolate bar, and handed it across the aisle. Here, he said quietly, in case they run out of snacks. The girl blinked, then smiled like someone had just handed her the moon. Later, mid-flight, the aisle shifted with motion. A flight attendant approached. A new face, mid-30s, dark hair, bright eyes. Her name tag read Monica. She carried a glass of still water and placed it on Kairo's tray. No sparkling? He asked. She leaned in, lowered her voice. I read the log note on your profile, she said. No gas and allergic to citrus. Kairo blinked. That level of detail. Only someone who had read his passenger profile notes would know that. Monica smiled. We don't just remember what people look like anymore. We remember who they are. Kairo looked up, impressed. That wasn't in the training manual, he said. She winked. Nope, that one was in your story. At 34,000 feet, Kairo pulled out his tablet. The new UI for GridLock 2.0 was almost complete. He'd rebuilt it with simpler activation gestures, stronger encryption, and most importantly, a new feature called Shadow Flag, allowing any passenger to silently tag an incident for review without triggering gridlock immediately. Why? Because not everyone needed the skies to shut down. Some just needed someone to believe them. Back on the ground, in a windowless boardroom in Atlanta, the CEO of a major airline wasn't smiling. "We've bent over backwards," he complained. "New training, rehiring, millions spent on ethics compliance, and now you want us to let kids flag crew behavior?" "Yes," said the Ethos AI representative calmly. "Because kids are passengers, just like adults. And who's going to decide what's biased, what's disrespectful?" The rep slid a file across the table. "Passengers will, and our system will learn," the CEO scoffed. But inside, he already knew the truth. The skies didn't belong to him anymore. They belonged to the people who flew in them. When the plane landed, Kairo waited until most of the cabin had cleared. As he stepped into the jet bridge, Shelby was standing near the gate desk, scanning something on a tablet. She looked up, saw him, paused. "Kairo," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "You remember me now?" "I do." They stood in silence for a moment. Not angry, not awkward, just honest. "I didn't know," she said. "I mean, I did, but I didn't understand." Kairo nodded. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "You have to keep going." Shelby smiled, but there was weight in it. "I will." That evening, in his Denver hotel room, Kairo sat by the window. Below him, airplanes rolled across tarmacs. Luggage carts zipped like beetles, and people of every age, size, and color moved in every direction. No one knew what each person had been through, what they carried, what they feared, what they hoped for. But maybe, just maybe, the world above them had changed a little. Not because someone screamed, not because someone fought, but because one kid chose to trust a system he helped build, one kid who got slapped, and chose to answer with code. The airport was noisy, as usual. Screaming toddlers, rolling luggage, boarding calls bouncing off glass walls like echoes in a canyon. But Kairo Washington moved through it differently now. Not like someone trying to go unnoticed, not like a kid trying to act grown. Just like himself. It had taken weeks. 5 flights, 4 different cities, countless headlines he never asked for. But today felt quieter. Not around him in Sanae. He passed through TSA with no issues, no pulled bag, no side-eye, no random selection. That alone was enough to make him pause for a moment after he grabbed his shoes. Small victories, the ones no one else notices, but you feel them. He smiled to himself and walked on. Gate 17A. Boarding begins in 12 minutes. Kairo sat near the corner window, headphones in, but no music playing. His tablet was open on his lap, displaying the new GridLock 2.0 dashboard. It looked clean, minimalist. Not just code anymore, but something closer to a promise. He tapped into the system and checked the status of live shadow flags. A green dot pulsed softly next to the number 87. Active but untriggered reports. People were watching now. Not to cancel flights, but to say, "Hey, I saw this, and it wasn't okay." And for once, someone was listening. A shadow moved in his periphery. "Excuse me," a voice said. Kairo looked up. A man in his mid-40s, wearing a neatly pressed uniform and a captain's hat. The badge on his chest read, Captain Willis. "You're Kairo Washington, aren't you?" Kairo blinked, unsure. "Yes?" Willis smiled. Not corporate, not forced, grateful. "I just wanted to say thank you," the man said. "Not for what you did to the system, for what you reminded us of." Kairo raised an eyebrow. "You reminded us that we don't fly planes for rules. We fly them for people." He extended a hand. Kairo shook it. Then, just as casually, the captain walked away, back to the cockpit, leaving Kairo sitting there with something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Pride. Not the loud kind. The kind that feels like you're finally standing in the right place. On board. Seat D. The flight attendant placed a small cup of water on his tray. No questions, no over-explaining. Kairo thanked her, then opened his sketch pad. At the top of a fresh page, he wrote, "What if dignity could be taught, not enforced?" Below it, he began to diagram something new. Not tech this time. A curriculum, stories, simulations, cabin role reversals, a full-circle empathy module. Something every crew member could do. Something real, not corporate box checking. He didn't know it yet, but that sketch would later become the Dignity Empathy Framework, a mandatory FAA onboarding module starting the following year. But right now, it was just a napkin idea on a half-crumpled page. Midway through the flight, the woman seated across from him, early 60s, elegant, quiet, leaned over. "I don't mean to bother you," she said softly, "but is that your name on all those articles?" Kairo glanced up. "Which ones?" "The stories," she said. "The boy who changed the airline industry, the gridlock incident, the child who never spoke but made the skies listen." He gave a half smile. "Some of them. Not all are accurate." She nodded. "Doesn't matter. What matters is you reminded the world that kindness isn't optional." She didn't ask for a selfie, didn't post anything. She just smiled and went back to her crossword. Across the country, in a boardroom overlooking Manhattan, the final signatures were being added to a document. The FAA, 3 major airlines, 2 union leaders, all putting their names to one agreement. The Passenger Equity Framework. Every airline using Ethos AI must implement mandatory quarterly ethics audits. All complaints tagged with dignity violations would be auto-reviewed within 72 hours. Bias-based removals would result in not just internal review, but funding loss from ESG partners. And most importantly, any passenger, regardless of class, age, or status, could flag violations without fear. And underneath all that fine print, one final clause. Protocol inspired by passenger KW, anonymous, yet unforgettable. Back in the air, Kairo closed his sketchbook. The cabin lights dimmed. The window next to him reflected his own face. He studied it, not out of vanity, but as if trying to reconcile who he had been a month ago with who he was now. That kid on Flight 481, the one who didn't yell, didn't fight back, didn't make a scene. He didn't vanish. He evolved into someone who understood that some revolutions don't need fire, just clarity and code. And the plane touched down at JFK just after 4:00 p.m. As Kairo stepped off, a small crew stood near the gate, preparing for their next turnaround. One of them, a young attendant, maybe 20, gave him a quiet thumbs up as he passed. Kairo didn't know him, but he knew the gesture. Recognition without noise, respect without spotlight, progress without permission. Later that evening, at his grandmother's apartment in Brooklyn, Kairo sat on the old brown couch, legs folded, tablet in hand. His grandmama, Ms. Edna Washington, 78, sharp as ever, brought in a tray of cookies. "You still working?" she asked, eyebrow raised. "Sort of," he said. She peeked at the screen. Lines of code, interfaces, ethics flowcharts. "Lord, you're just like your daddy," she laughed. "Except you don't wait for permission to fix something." Kairo smiled. "Is that bad?" "No, baby. That's legacy." She sat beside him and handed him a cookie. "You think it's over?" she asked. Kairo looked out the window. A plane traced the sky, barely visible. "No," he said. "But it's quieter now. People are listening." She nodded. "That's the start." Before bed, Kairo sent one final update to Ethos AI. A small patch, just a bug fix in the shadow flag visibility delay. But in the comments, he wrote, "Not everyone will change, but now they'll know someone is watching and someone cares." 1 week later, at a training session in Dallas, a room full of new flight attendants gathered around a projection screen. The title at the top read, "Dignity First, Cabin Ethics in the Age of Accountability. No photos, no names, just one opening sentence. This story starts with a slap and ends with a system that slapped back." The boardroom was too quiet for a Thursday. Somewhere in the heart of Washington, D.C., 3 FAA executives sat stiffly at the edge of a long, polished table. Opposite them sat 5 airline CEOs, each looking 10 years older than they did last quarter. On the large screen at the end of the room blinked a familiar logo, Ethos AI, Passenger Integrity Division, and beneath it, a live feed. A countdown timer. Protocol freeze in 001426. 14 minutes and 26 seconds before $1.2 billion in ESG-backed flight subsidies would lock. The room pulsed with unspoken panic. "Gentlemen," the FAA director said, straightening his tie, "we've been patient for months, but the implementation window has closed." An executive from Veritas Jet leaned forward. "With all due respect, we've made changes. New training manuals, internal memos, public apologies." The director cut him off. "You sent a PDF to your crew. That's not systemic reform. That's window dressing." The room fell silent again. The countdown ticked down to 1340. Across the country, in a quiet conference room inside Ethos AI's headquarters, Kairo watched silently. He wasn't in the boardroom, but he didn't need to be. His fingerprints were on every clause of the Passenger Integrity Accord. And now, the system he'd helped design was about to speak louder than any press release ever could. Next to him sat Samir, Ethos AI's Director of Strategic Ethics, and Mira, the lead policy architect. "Once the timer hits 0, Mira said, "the system automatically notifies all ESG funding partners. Freeze triggers, airport boards are alerted, loyalty integrations pause." Kairo nodded, not blinking. "Good." Samir turned toward him. "You sure you don't want to give them more time?" Kairo didn't flinch. "They already got more time than I did." Back in the FAA boardroom, 12:31. A voice from one CEO, tight with anxiety. "So what happens if we sign now?" The FAA director tilted his head. "You sign now, and you stay connected to the Dignity Grid. You keep access to airport scheduling AI. You keep your ESG partners. You keep flying. And if we don't?" The screen flashed. A new window popped open. "Flight access suspension pending, 142 international routes affected." Someone cursed under their breath. No one moved. At the same time, across 17 airports, internal systems began shifting. Boarding gate software dimmed. Loyalty program check-in APIs flickered. A ripple of uncertainty buzzed through back-end systems. Gate agents received quiet alerts. Tech staff scrambled. But no one could override what was coming. Because what was coming had already begun. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet above Kansas, Flight 472 cruised on autopilot. In first class, a woman in her 50s leaned over to a flight attendant. "Excuse me, are you aware of what's happening with the airline systems right now?" The attendant looked up from her tablet, blinking. "No, ma'am. What do you mean?" The passenger held up her phone. News headlines scrolled across the screen. "Ethics Protocol freeze triggers industry lockout. 2.6B in aviation credit suspended pending accord. FAA backs youth-created passenger Bill of Rights." The attendant stepped back, eyes wide. "What?" Then, her work tablet lit up with an incoming notice. "Mandatory reconfirmation required. Passenger dignity agreement. Accept or reassign flight crew." She stared at it, pulse rising. Back at Ethos AI, the countdown reached 00. The screen blinked white. Then a new screen slid in. "Protocol lock engaged. 142 routes suspended. 2.6B in funds. Frozen 19 airports. Enter hold mode ethics audit timeline initiated." Kairo leaned back in his chair. He didn't smile. Not out of anger, but reverence. This wasn't a win. This was accountability, delivered without a single word raised. 1 week later, headlines changed. Airlines sign historic passenger equity accord. New FAA guidelines mandate dignity audits. Kairo Washington named youngest honorary ethics advisor in FAA history. But Kairo stayed quiet. No interviews, no speeches, no awards. He preferred to walk through airports unnoticed. Not as a symbol, not as a headline, just as a boy with a boarding pass and the right to sit in his seat without being questioned. On a sunny Tuesday in Atlanta, he sat alone in a cafe overlooking the tarmac. A young girl, no older than 8, sat across from him with her mother, sipping hot cocoa. She tapped her mom's arm and whispered something. The mother leaned over to Kairo. She says, "Are you the boy who saved the sky?" Kairo looked at the girl, then back at her mom. He took a sip of water and answered softly, "No, I just reminded it how to breathe." The girl smiled. So did her mom. That same day, in a training center in Dallas, flight crew gathered for their new onboarding module. A screen displayed the title, Passenger Dignity 101, Empathy, Identity, Respect. The first exercise wasn't about safety drills. It was about role reversal. Today, the instructor began, you're not flight attendants. You're passengers. Some of you will be treated with grace. Others will face microaggressions. Your job is to reflect, not defend. One crew member scoffed, but by the end of the day, after being ignored, interrupted, and publicly questioned for no reason during a simulation, he sat in silence. Then quietly said, "I get it now. I finally get it." Meanwhile, in a corner of the world where no one was looking, Kairo kept writing. Not code this time. A letter. Handwritten. No email. No encryption. Addressed to the woman who had slapped him. He didn't send it, but he finished it. Inside, it read, "You didn't just slap me. You woke up a system that had been asleep for too long, and now it's awake and watching." By the end of the month, all major U.S. airlines had signed the Passenger Integrity Charter. Over $2.6 billion in funding was restored. 142 suspended routes were reactivated. 19 airports launched real-time bias reporting dashboards. And for the first time, children as young as 6 could trigger silent dignity flags via their in-flight screens. One boy had changed the air without raising his voice. Not with revenge, but with reason. In a final closed-door meeting between Ethos AI and the FAA, one administrator leaned forward and asked, "What happens next? What if the system gets abused?" Kairo answered, "If we're more afraid of the system being abused than people being humiliated, we haven't learned anything." Silence, then a nod. And for once, the room didn't erupt into defense. It absorbed. That night, as the last plane took off from JFK under a tangerine sky, a child sat by the window and stared out at the clouds. She didn't know about protocols, or ESG, or code. But when the flight attendant smiled at her and offered a snack, and called her by her name, she smiled back. Because she felt it. She mattered. The Smithsonian didn't usually showcase airplane seats, but this one was different. On the mezzanine level of the new Ethics in Transit exhibit, behind a glass case softly lit from above, sat Seat 2A. Cream leather, aged but intact. A placard underneath read, "The seat occupied by Kairo Washington on Flight 481, marked as the symbolic beginning of the passenger dignity movement." Next to it, a simple quote. He didn't raise his voice, but the skies still heard him. People stopped and stared. Some read every word. Others just stood in silence. No one touched the glass. It didn't feel like a museum piece. It felt like a memory everyone somehow shared. Back in Brooklyn, Kairo walked through the same neighborhood he always had. Hoodie up, earbuds in, backpack slung casually over one shoulder. The city hadn't changed, but he had. Not in a flashy way. In the way you walk when you're not looking over your shoulder anymore. In the way you hold your head when you know you belong. Not because someone allowed it, but because you stopped asking. He passed the barber shop where the guys on the stoop used to laugh and yell his name every Saturday. Now, they just gave a nod. Not distant, respectful. Later that evening, Kairo sat in his room, lights low, laptop open. On the screen were analytics from the GridLock 2.0 update. 64,219 silent dignity flags triggered in 72 countries. 22001 wrongful detainments reversed. 128 crew dismissals followed by industry retraining. 98% satisfaction score from passengers under age 18. He scrolled slowly, not for ego, for clarity. Each flag meant someone had spoken up, someone who might have stayed quiet before. And the system hadn't just listened, it had acted. A soft knock. His grandma peeked in. "You eating dinner or staring at justice all night?" Kairo smiled. "Both?" She rolled her eyes and walked in, plate in hand. Fried fish, collards, cornbread like only Ms. Edna could make. He closed the laptop and took the plate. She sat beside him on the bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You know what I realized?" Kairo looked up, mid-bite. "You didn't change the system because you were loud. You changed it because you were still." Meanwhile, inside the FAA's ethics division, something rare was happening. 3 senior officials, flanked by legal advisors, sat across from a panel of citizens. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a listening session, open to the public, televised live. One mother stood and told a story about her 7-year-old daughter who had been asked to prove she belonged in first class. A father shared how his son had been escorted off a flight after appearing too nervous. Then a woman in her 80s stood. "I've been flying for over 50 years, she said, "and this is the first time I've ever believed someone's watching out for me at 30,000 feet. The room applauded, and no one told them to sit down. Back at Ethos AI, Samir walked into the strategy lab with a large white envelope in hand. "Delivery for you," he said. Kairo looked up. "Is it another letter from Congress?" "Nope," Samir grinned. "Better." He placed the envelope on the table. It had a gold seal with the letters SVA, Skyview Alliance, embossed across the flap. Kairo opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "You have been unanimously elected to the Passenger Integrity Council, youngest member in history." At the bottom, a handwritten note. "Not because you made noise, but because you built something we can't ignore." That night, Kairo stood on the rooftop of his building. The city spread out below, a web of lights and movement. He looked up. A plane passed overhead, blinking, steady. He wondered how many passengers were asleep, how many were anxious, how many were kids, and how many felt, maybe for the first time, safe. 3 months later, the first Dignity Framework school module rolled out across 19 flight academies. It wasn't mandatory. It was requested, because something had shifted. It wasn't just about compliance anymore. It was about culture. In one classroom, a simulation exercise asked new flight attendants to handle an unruly passenger, not with control, but with curiosity. "What made you feel unsafe today? What can I do to earn your trust?" Simple questions, but they landed harder than any de-escalation training, because they came from a place of shared humanity, not protocol. One final hearing took place in DC, private, small, no media, only 4 people in the room, an FAA senior chair, an ESG funding representative, Kairo, and Barbara Sterling, the former flight attendant who slapped him. She looked older, not in years, in posture. She didn't make excuses. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I thought I was protecting the cabin. I didn't realize I was damaging the future." Then she stood, walked to Kairo, and asked a question no one expected. "May I help teach the framework?" Silence. Kairo studied her, then said, "Only if you're ready to listen more than you talk." She nodded. "I am," and so she did. By year's end, 142 airports worldwide had integrated the Passenger Integrity Protocol. Ethos AI went public, not as a tech firm, but as a social infrastructure foundation, and Kairo, he stayed quiet, still refused interviews, still took public flights like anyone else, still preferred the aisle seat, because to him, power wasn't about elevation, it was about access. One evening, while returning from a short domestic trip, he landed at an airport in a small town in Oregon. As he waited for his bag, a boy, maybe 9 years old, brown-skinned, wide-eyed, walked up and said, "Are you the boy from the plane?" Kairo smiled. "Which one?" The boy giggled. "The one that changed stuff." Kairo nodded. Maybe, but I didn't do it alone. The boy looked confused. But the system changed because of you. Kairo leaned down. No, the system changed because it needed to. I just reminded it that people were watching. Back in Brooklyn, that same night, Ms. Edna pulled a folded paper from the bottom drawer of her nightstand. It was the original passenger report, filed by Barbara. False. Dismissive. She read it one more time, then shredded it. Because that version of the story didn't matter anymore. The real version had already flown. The conference room inside the new Passenger Ethics Institute looked nothing like a government office. It was bright, circular, full of light wood, wide windows, and chairs arranged not in rows, but in a circle. No podium, no hierarchy, just listening. At the center sat Kairo, now 14, wearing a soft charcoal sweater, jeans, and his signature, quiet eyes. Across from him sat 12 people, regulators, flight instructors, airport board members, and one seat that remained empty, until the door opened. And in walked Barbara Sterling, the woman who had once slapped Kairo in first class. No gasps, no judgment, just awareness. She sat, and the session began. "I'm here because I failed," Barbara started. "But I also know what it feels like to carry shame and not run from it." Her voice wasn't rehearsed. It wavered. "But this isn't about my redemption. It's about making sure no other child is made to feel like a threat for simply existing in a space they earned." The room stayed quiet, not out of discomfort, but respect. Kairo finally spoke. "We're not here to punish. We're here to build. This is the last test before we activate the live grid feature. What you say today may shape every international training policy from here on." He tapped the small screen in front of him. A digital mock-up of GridLock 3.0 appeared, the future of passenger dignity enforcement. The grid had evolved. Now, every flagged report from passengers wasn't just logged. It triggered a live empathy simulation, one that would play in real time for all active crew and airport staff involved in a flagged incident. The simulation wouldn't punish. It would mirror. Flight attendants would suddenly experience the flight from the exact perspective of the passenger they had dismissed, including interruptions, assumptions, facial expressions, tone of voice used on them. Not exaggerated, accurate, emotionally inescapable. "This isn't about making people feel bad," Kairo said. "It's about making them feel real." Barbara nodded. "I did the pilot test last month," she said. "It was hard. Seeing myself through someone else's fear, that shook me." One instructor asked, "But won't some people resist? Claim it's manipulative?" Kairo shrugged. "Let them. You can't fix what you won't feel. And if you don't want to feel the discomfort your passengers live with, you probably shouldn't be responsible for their safety." Silence again. Then one of the FAA board members spoke. "So, how do we teach this? Where does it start?" Kairo answered, "With children." Back in Brooklyn, Ms. Edna had started something she never imagined she would. A Saturday reading circle. Except it wasn't just for storybooks. Each weekend, she'd gather a handful of neighborhood kids and read them passenger reports, redacted for privacy, anonymized, but real. She'd read the story, then ask one question: what should have happened instead? And the answers? Heartbreaking, hopeful, incredible. One 9-year-old said, "The lady should have asked if he needed help, not if he was dangerous." Another, "Just because someone's quiet doesn't mean they're lying." One girl said softly, "I think adults forget that kids can tell when they're not wanted." Ms. Edna wrote every response in a notebook titled, "What the System Forgot." Meanwhile, in flight academies around the world, instructors were beginning to use reverse interviews. Trainees weren't just quizzed on protocol. They were asked by kids to explain how they would make them feel safe on a plane. If the child didn't feel respected, they failed. No multiple choice, just human connection. One trainee was stunned when a 10-year-old girl simply looked at him after he finished his answer and said, "You're too busy being right. I just want to feel welcome." In Washington, D.C., A quiet ceremony took place inside the Library of Congress. No media, no cameras, just 12 scholars, 3 members of Congress, and 1 teenage boy. Kairo. They handed him a black-bound volume titled The Passenger Integrity Framework, Charter Edition. His name printed inside the dedication page. He flipped it open. Inside were stories, not policies. Stories from children, elders, and people once ignored, each followed by one rule. When in doubt, choose dignity. That evening, Kairo stood at the same gate at JFK where it had all begun. The terminal was quieter than he remembered, but the gate agent greeted him with a nod and a warm, genuine smile. No scanning him twice, no whispering to a colleague. Just this. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington. We've got your seat ready. Gate 2A. He didn't ask for it, but they gave it anyway. This time, no glass, no cameras, no plaque. Just the seat, and the peace that came with it. Halfway through the flight, he walked quietly to the rear galley. Barbara stood there, organizing service trays. He tapped the edge of the cart gently. She turned. They looked at each other. Then she asked, "Still sketching new systems?" He nodded. "Always." She smiled. "You know, most people your age are sketching sneakers." He replied without sarcasm. "Shoes change how we walk. Systems change where we're allowed to go." She exhaled. "Thanks for letting me come back." Kairo's response was simple. "You never left. You just didn't know which direction forward was." As the plane landed, a quiet moment passed. No announcements, no ceremonies. Just a boy walking through the jet bridge, backpack over his shoulder, hoodie back up. And a quiet promise, stitched into every terminal, every policy, every AI system running quietly behind the screens. Passengers are not proof, they are people. Elsewhere, at an international aviation summit in Zurich, one executive leaned to another after reviewing the latest report on GridLock 3.0. "This thing, it's bulletproof." The other replied, "No, it's childproof. That's why it works." They laughed, then nodded. Because deep down, they both knew the future of aviation had already taken off, and it was flying at the speed of empathy. 3 weeks after the passenger integrity framework went into effect, 19 airports lit up with quiet updates on their overhead screens. Not flashy, not announced. Just a tiny symbol in the lower right-hand corner of each boarding pass. Skyline compliant. Most people didn't notice it, but for those who did, those who once felt the invisible weight of not belonging, it meant everything. A silent signal. You are protected here. Back at Ethos AI, Kairo sat in front of a touchscreen wall, analyzing real-time passenger experience data. The board flickered softly with colored routes, audio sentiment graphs, and incident flags. Since the rollout of GridLock 3.0, something remarkable had happened. Complaints dropped by 46%. Bias-based removals fell by 72%. Voluntary crew apologies increased tenfold, not because people were scared of being flagged, but because people were finally listening to each other. "Mr. Washington?" A staffer knocked gently. Kairo looked up. "Yeah?" "There's someone waiting in the lobby. Said they don't have an appointment, but they brought this." She held up a small envelope, handwritten with the initials LD on the back. He frowned, stood, and followed her. When he entered the lounge, an older white man stood to greet him. "Mr. Washington," he said, with a quiet firmness. "My name is Louis Drexler. You probably don't recognize me." Kairo nodded. "Actually, I do. You were the CEO of Liberty Sky the day I got slapped." Louis lowered his head. "Yes, and I've been trying to find a way to say what needs to be said ever since." They sat. No cameras, no press. Just 2 people, one young, one weathered, on opposite ends of a decision made long ago, and the ripple it caused. "I wasn't on the plane that day," Louis began, "but I was in the meeting afterward. I was shown the footage, and I did nothing." He folded his hands tightly. "I didn't fire Barbara. I didn't apologize to your family. I told my board it would blow over. And it didn't, Kairo said softly. No, Louis replied, because you didn't let it, and thank God for that. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. This is a signed letter of withdrawal. Liberty Sky is voluntarily stepping down from the Global Aviation Council. We'll be entering a full ethics audit under the Passenger Dignity Act. Kairo didn't flinch. He simply asked, "Why now?" Louis looked him straight in the eyes. "Because I have a granddaughter. She's 7, and last week, a flight attendant let her sit in the cockpit before takeoff. Not because she asked, but because the system said she could. That moment never would have happened without you." Kairo exhaled slowly. "And what do you want from me?" Louis shook his head. "Nothing. I came to say I'm sorry. Not to undo the past, but to stop letting it repeat itself." Later that evening, Kairo walked through a familiar terminal. Gate B-17, the same one where everything began. But this time, he wasn't flying. He was watching. Across from him, a young black girl, maybe 8 years old, stood nervously at the counter, holding her boarding pass. The gate agent knelt down to her level. "Hey there, you ready to fly?" She nodded shyly. "Well, seat 2A is waiting just for you." The girl looked confused. "But I didn't buy that seat." The agent winked. "You didn't have to. Someone already cleared it." Kairo smiled and turned away. He didn't need thanks, just that look on her face, that quiet joy. That moment she believed she belonged. The next morning, a report flashed across news headlines. 2.6B in funding unlocked after FAA signs final compliance agreement. 19 airports fully adopt the Skyline Passenger Equity Charter. Passenger satisfaction across top airlines hits 93%. The boy who changed the skies, he just designed their future. That day, Samir entered Kairo's office holding a box. "What's that?" Kairo asked. "Prototype, GridLock 4.0. Kairo raised an eyebrow. "Already?" Samir grinned. "This one doesn't just react to injustice. It anticipates dignity needs before they're violated." Kairo smiled. "You know, if this keeps up, flying might actually feel human again." Samir nodded, then said, almost as an afterthought, "You're presenting at the UN next month." Kairo blinked. "Wait, what?" Samir tossed him a small card. "Passenger Rights in Motion, Youth Summit. Keynote, Kairo Washington." Outside, a plane soared overhead. Below, a boy walked through the terminal he once feared, now redesigned, reimagined, and finally worthy of every passenger it served. It was spring again in New York, that kind of rare, gentle spring where the air feels lighter than the weeks before and even the subway musicians play softer. Kairo stood just outside the entrance to Skyline Hall, where the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Passenger Ethics and Reform Wing was minutes from starting. His name was etched in the glass, the Kairo Washington Legacy Pavilion, but he had asked the organizers not to announce him. "No fanfare," he told them, "just space for people to breathe." Inside, seats were filling with FAA officials, airline execs, former passengers, and even a handful of kids in school uniforms. Children who'd once submitted drawings to Ethos AI, envisioning the kindest airplane cabin in the world. At the very front of the room, one seat was left empty. Seat 2A, reconstructed to match the one he sat in when it all began. Untouched, unclaimed, intentionally so. Because some seats aren't meant to be filled again. Kairo sat in the back row, hoodie on, posture casual. But every part of him was alert, not anxious, just quietly present. The woman at the podium began to speak. "Today," she said, "we don't just celebrate a reform. We mark a cultural reset, not because one person demanded it, but because one person reminded us what dignity feels like when everything else is silent." The audience applauded, soft and steady. A montage played across a large screen. Clips of flight training sessions using empathy-based simulation, testimonials from passengers who once felt afraid to board, Footage of an elderly man holding the hand of a nervous teen as they both entered a terminal labeled Skyline Certified. Then came an interview clip, not of Kairo, but of Ms. Edna. "He never wanted a spotlight," she said, seated on her front porch. "He just wanted no one else to feel what he did." The interviewer off camera asked, "And how do you think he changed the world?" She smiled. "He didn't. He changed how the world listens." After the event, as guests filtered out, one of the younger students approached the stage and stood quietly in front of seat 2A. Kairo watched from a distance. The boy, maybe 10 years old, reached into his backpack and placed a folded piece of paper on the seat, then walked away. Later, Kairo retrieved it. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were 5 words: "Thank you for holding space." That night, Kairo returned home. He didn't turn on the lights, just dropped his bag, kicked off his shoes, and opened the window. The city buzzed below. But in his apartment, everything was still. On his desk sat the first prototype sketch of GridLock 1.0, drawn in pencil, edges frayed, corners bent. Beside it, the letter from Louis Drexler, the shredded report from Barbara, a photo of seat 2A. Kairo ran his finger along the edge of the paper and smiled. In a quiet airport lounge in another country, a new flight crew reviewed their route plan. Before boarding, their captain held up a printed card. "No announcements today," he said, but this was just issued. It read, "Effective immediately. Passengers under 18 may not be relocated from their assigned seats without written consent from a guardian or independent verification from the Skyline Oversight Panel." The crew nodded. No pushback, just progress. And somewhere above the clouds, a flight attendant paused in front of a young boy seated by the window. She knelt, met his eyes, and said, "Your seat is yours, always." He blinked, then smiled. That moment, just that, was enough. 2 months had passed since the final rollout of the Passenger Integrity Framework, and everything seemed to be functioning better than anyone dared hope. But Kairo wasn't satisfied. He sat in his grandmother's kitchen, elbow deep in a folder of data reports, while the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg floated in from the stove. Ms. Edna stirred her peach cobbler and glanced over her shoulder. "You've been reading for 2 hours," she said. "You writing a new system or solving world peace?" Kairo didn't look up. "Neither. Just trying to understand the question that keeps bothering me." She turned down the flame. "What question?" He finally looked up. "Why did it take me being slapped for people to care?" The room fell quiet. Ms. Edna walked over, sat down across from him, and gently tapped the table. "Because sometimes, baby, pain speaks louder than proof, and too many folks won't change a thing until the pain's public." Kairo nodded slowly. "But it shouldn't have to be that way." "No, it shouldn't," she agreed. "But now that it happened, what do you do with it?" He thought for a second. "Make sure it doesn't take another slap." That's how the Passenger Echo project began. Kairo and a small team of volunteers designed a digital archive, not for policies or laws, but for stories. Real stories. Everyday stories. Quiet injustices that were never recorded because they weren't loud enough. They launched it anonymously. No logos, no names, no credits. Just a site with one message. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unwelcome while traveling, tell us. Submissions poured in. A mother from Omaha wrote about being ignored when asking for water for her autistic son. A retired veteran in Miami shared how he was nearly removed because he coughed too loudly. A teenage girl wrote a 3-sentence story. "They thought I couldn't afford it. I could, but I never flew again." The archive didn't make headlines, but it made waves. Airlines started using it as a required reading database for crew training. Several airports installed terminals where passengers could add to it in real time. More importantly, passengers saw their own stories on the screen and knew they weren't alone. One night, as Kairo scrolled through the latest submissions, he paused on one entry. It was from a girl named Amina, 9 years old. Typed in clumsy lowercase with no punctuation, it read, "I was scared to ask for help because last time the lady said I was too loud and my mom got sad." Kairo stared at the screen, then clicked Feature. That story would be the first to play in the new flight attendant empathy modules starting next month. Later that week, Ms. Edna found Kairo on the porch, sketchbook in his lap. "You still thinking about the question?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "No, I think I'm finally asking a better one." "What's that?" He closed the book and said, "What if we never needed proof in the first place?" 3 years later, Terminal 4 at JFK had changed, subtly but deeply. There were no posters, no memorials, no plaques with faces, just one new feature. Every first-class gate now had a seat with no number, just a small engraved phrase on the headrest, reserved for the one who made dignity fly again. It wasn't a statue, wasn't even technically labeled, but somehow, everyone knew who it was for. Kairo had returned from Geneva that morning. He'd been invited to speak at the World Transport Ethics Forum, where dozens of nations had signed onto a version of the passenger integrity charter his systems had inspired. But none of that felt real until now. Until he walked into the terminal where it had all started, not with a slap, but with silence. And now, a different silence met him, not one of humiliation, but of honor. He passed by seat 2A again, the same spot, untouched, preserved by quiet agreement. Then someone tapped his shoulder. "Excuse me, are you Kairo?" He turned. A boy, maybe 11, stood in front of him, holding a small sketch pad and a nervous smile. "My name's Jalen. My teacher told us about your story. I drew this for you." He handed over a folded page. On it, a picture of an airplane, but with wings made of people, all kinds, holding hands, protecting a child in the center seat. At the bottom, in big letters, "We don't forget who fixed the sky." Kairo's throat tightened. "Thank you," he whispered. This means more than you know." Jalen looked up at him, then asked, "Can I sit next to you? Just until they board us?" Kairo nodded. "Yeah, of course." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Kairo said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I used to think changing the world meant standing on a stage. But it turns out, sometimes it just means not giving up your seat." Nearby, a woman boarded early with her toddler. The attendant knelt beside the child. "This is your seat, okay? Nobody touches it but you." And the little girl nodded, clutching a tiny toy airplane. Kairo smiled faintly and let himself breathe. The PA system called boarding for Group 1. Jalen stood, gave Kairo a quick wave, and disappeared into the gate. Kairo didn't board yet. He sat for a while longer, next to the seat that stayed empty, watching passengers move around it, many pausing, some smiling, a few placing thank you notes they'd never send. Not because the world was perfect now, but because someone once made it pause long enough to change course. What would you have done if that was your child? What seat have you ever been forced to give up, in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, even just a little, share it with someone who still believes dignity should never be optional. This isn't just a story about one flight. It's about the moment we all decided to stop flying blind. Thanks for watching, and tell us, where are you watching from today?